the story a bit more compelling, a bit more believable and plausible, and that includes very powerful cliffhangers that bring people back, and also come back to the look of it. If you can create an atmosphere on the screen that people believe they're in that world, you know, the strange world, an alien world, or whatever, then I think it sort of does become a bit more, it appeals more to adults, I think, you know.
It must have been difficult, though, to have created all of these worlds and the atmosphere when you've got a soap opera setup, a multi-camera setup, and you are in Studio 3. And how did you actually decide where the money should go? Because none of your seasons have a cheapie. I think a lot of the other seasons that you look at in Doctor Who, you can see that was the cheap one. But you don't seem to have that. They all look the same level.
Well, we did have cheapies, you didn't spot them.
Right. How did you stop it?
Well, I think I think I did sort of think ahead, really, and basically I worked out what the selling points were, what were the basic ingredients that made this story special and different, and then in a way I would sort of put the resources into that, you know, and in some stories it would mean more outside, you know, location work. In others it might be all shot in the studio, like Robots of Death, for example, but you would put the resources maybe into costume more, like, you know, the Mask of Mandragora and things like that, or maybe the actors, you know. And so, in other words, we had the formula of how much was available, but you could spread it over a season and invest in different shows, you know, and rob Peter to pay Paul, as it were, and by planning ahead and finding out how we could do things. Like, for example, I suppose a good example would be, can we do this strange planet? You know, I asked Roger Murray Leach, and he said, yes, I can, but I need to film it on the stage in Ealing, not in the studio. Those sorts of decisions taken early on meant that, yes, that's where quite a lot of the money went for that, but it was worth it, because it was about the planet, you know.
Was it also a question of, when you looked at the scripts, fitting them to maybe the right director, so that you knew this is a...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I knew exactly which director to do it. Yeah. Some were more traditional drama directors, and Sci-Fi, they didn't really like it, but they were on staff, so they did it anyway. So those sorts of directors, like Paddy Russell, you played to her strengths, you know, with the actors and all the rest of it, and you wouldn't have given her Robots of Death to do. Whereas Michael Bryant, you give him any trickery in the studio and he could do it in 5 minutes. I mean, he was a genius. So yeah, absolutely. And Dougie Camfield was the right man to have, you know, military stuff and out and about on location, because he's a film director, really. So yeah, you absolutely matched directors to the show, yeah.
So, was there ever such a thing as a typical day in the job of producing? I mean, on any show, is there a typical day, or is it just always going to just go as the wind blows? I mean,
well, if you want to be a producer in films or TV, I think you have to be the sort of person that can wake up in the morning and know there will always be a problem when you go in, and you're able to deal with that. You know, you might not be able to solve it, but you have to sort of have the mentality. It's a bit like being in a perpetual battle. So, well, I suppose, no, you follow the chronology of production, and then your shows overlap. That's why you need a producer for a series. So, you know, you have the scripting. That's really quite fun early on. What ideas and all, I mean, I found that, exciting, because I'm sort of writer type. And so that's the fun bit, and then you commission writers to write the scripts. Then you get disappointed because they're no bloody good. So then you have to think about rewriting. So while that's going on, you're then planning your season, and you're wooing your directors and wooing your designers, try and get the best people and assembling your team. So that's a sort of continual thing. And then you hit the actual productions, and then well, that just, you know, you go into rehearsal, and then you do your pre-filming or whatever, in my days anyway, and then you went in the studio, and then there was post-production, a little bit of editing, of putting together the show from the studio, and then the sound editing, and dubbing and putting the music on. So you followed really but you'd have all these things going on at the same time, so they'd overlap. So one day you'd be looking at, you know, the filming, another day you'd be doing a post-production on, you know, a dub on one, and then you'd still be working on the script of something else. So, you know, it was a mixture.
Were you quite hands-on? Would you go on location shoots, or would you be in the studio on recording days?
I was always there on, recording days. You had to be there, absolutely. But not when they're blocking, camera blocking, because you don't need to be there for that. But you need to be there for later on in the day. I would have liked. I didn't really get onto location much because there was so much to do back in the office. I got onto location later in my career as a producer, much more than I did actually when I was doing Doctor Who.
So, it had brilliant ratings when you were there. The ratings were really quite extraordinary. So it must have felt like a really a winning combination. So, what was your reaction when Liz Sladen decided, no, that's enough? Did you try and persuade her to stay on?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, absolutely. And I was very sad that I think she left us season 2 early, at least. Yeah. But I don't know. She seemed to get it in her head really that, you know. I mean, I've been told that she thought that, you know, I thought she was Barry's, you know, sort of assistant, but not. I mean, I thought she was fantastic with Tom, and the chemistry between them was wonderful, and I've got nothing but utmost admiration for everything she ever did. She was marvellous. It was sad to see her go.
So is it true then that the story that follows, Deadly Assassin, was that actually created because Tom Baker wanted to prove that he could go it alone, and was it there to actually show him it wasn't possible? That's the legend.
No, what happened was Liz said she was going, and Tom sidled up to me one day and said, Philip, do you think I really need an assistant? I could do it on my own, he said. I could talk to myself. So I said, well, yeah, you could, Tom, but you could not forever. But I said, but it gave me an idea, and I said, well, I tell you what, we'll do one just with you. We've got a story that, you know, we could do that with, and it was a sort of vague story idea I'd got myself, and so it was just a sort of one-off, really. We had no intention of trying to prove you needed an assistant, but I'd got this idea in my head, which actually, funnily enough, I think comes into a number of the stories that we did. So it was something I unconsciously returned to, I think, that the Doctor, you know, sort of somehow committed a crime or done something that then comes back to haunt him, and he has to sort of deal with it, you know. And I had this idea, which I then, you know, kicked around with Bob Holmes, and that's how the Deadly Assassin sort of came into being.
And one episode of that is almost entirely shot on film. So were you at that point sort of experimenting more with film work as opposed to VT? Were you much more interested?
No. It's just that we realised the way the script, this, you know, virtual reality battle or stalking, you know, between these two, you know, it had to be shot on film, you know. But I was very worried at the time that we couldn't do it, but David Maloney said, no, I can do all that, you know, I can get it all in, basically. And he leapt at it because it was, you know, it's an opportunity for him to do something a little bit different and wild. And I said to Bob Holmes, just do something really surreal and odd, you know, let's go for it and do a completely different kind of story. I mean, in a way, you know, when you think about it, you know, The Matrix, there was, you know, we were actually doing ideas that have been done by loads of movies afterwards. Yes. You know, virtual reality battles, a Matrix, all that sort of stuff. So we were kind of doing a story like that in the format of Doctor Who. And it's what I've often said, is that it's such a malleable format. You can do all sorts of stories with it, you know. And so it's worth doing something a bit nearer the edge.
Of course, we
We're
can't.
only talking about Doctor Who here, aren't we?
Well, however, you can't talk about Deadly Assassin without bringing in Mary Whitehouse.
Aren't we all fed up with Mary Whitehouse? Yeah, no, we've done Mary Whitehouse.
Okay, so when you were pushing the envelope a little bit with trying to make the show a bit scarier, where did you feel the line should be drawn, or did you feel...
Well, you kind of, when you see it, you sort of instinctively know it. I think the thing is, she was a different generation, she came from a different point of view. It was actually meant to be a family show, it wasn't a children's show, it wasn't produced by the children's department. And you know, I was a young producer. I mean, you went to the movies, you were watching Straw Dogs and things like that, you know. Sweeney, people were beating each other up, you know. So it was changing, you know, and she was a bit behind the curve, and I was probably at the front of the curve.
Yeah.
And that's all the difference between us, really.
And it's not long after, though, of course, that you, you left Doctor Who. Was that a decision that you made, or was it just a...
No, it was made for me.
Right. Would you have stayed?
Yeah, we were beginning to plan a fourth season, yeah.
What would that fourth season have looked like, do you think?
Well, we didn't get very far.
Right.
But I mean, one idea was, and I've said this before, that I thought that we could explore in one story at least, maybe more. Again, coming back to my childhood, somewhere in the back of my reading or whatever was the idea of the sort of bulldog drum and, you know, those sorts of colonial type of explorers and, you know, dark doings in Africa and places like that, and or sort of in Middle Eastern countries, you know, and I just had this notion we could explore and take the Doctor into that sort of field, which was in the end the Indiana Jones sort of thing,
Yes.
really.
Yeah. And you moved on from Doctor Who to Target. Of course, the real, really noticeable difference is that Target is entirely shot on film. Is that a much more lengthy process than the whole VT and film mixture?
Well, not really, no, it's much quicker, because the run-up time, once you get the scripts in, the run-up time is much shorter, and then you go and shoot it. Well, I tried to copy the Sweeney, but of course it was very difficult because of the union structure and working practices at the BBC. We tried to shoot in 10 days, which the Sweeney could do, and Minder, because they were an offshoot from Thames Television. They were like a little film unit on their own. But in the end, we had to go to 11 and then eventually 12. So when Bergerac was made,